Hi there. I'm Claudia Hosky from Fed Insider, and on behalf of the George Washington University Center for Excellence in Public Leadership, DLT Solutions, and CrowdStrike, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar. Please type your questions and comments into the Q&A pod. If we don't get to them during today's show, we'll share them with our speakers so they can follow up with you. Also, take note of the Resources tab on the left side of your screen to download today's slides and additional materials on cyber solutions. We offer live captioning for all of our webinars. To follow along with us today, use the hyperlink under the Live Captioning or CART tab above the slides. We'll have the full transcript available in the next day or two. And to earn training credit for today's webinar, you'll need to answer all polling questions throughout. And now, let me turn over the reins to our moderator, John Breeden from Fed Insider, to begin today's discussion. Take it away, John.
Excellent. Thank you, Claudia. And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm John Breeden, and I will be moderating what I know will be a lively and interesting discussion about how federal agencies are taking zero trust to the next level of innovation in government. Of course, by now, we all know that zero trust is at the core of the Cybersecurity Executive Order, but wanting to implement zero trust and actually doing it are two different things. Today, we will talk about how feds can and are going about moving from a never trust and always verify mindset to actually putting those concepts into practice, as well as finding increasingly innovative ways to achieve that goal. It's a highly technical topic, but have no fear because we have four amazingly talented guests with us today from both federal agencies and industry. So let me welcome them, and then we can get started. First off, let's say hello to Sean Connolly, the Trusted Internet Connection Program Manager and Senior Cybersecurity Architect with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Sean, it's an honor to have you joining us today on the show.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here.
Excellent. We also have Kevin Gallo, the Director of Technical Account Management with the Office of Enterprise Technology Solutions for the General Services Administration. Kevin, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with our audience today about this critically important topic.
Hello, and thanks so much for including me on today's panel.
Wonderful. We are also joined by Randy Resnick, the Director of the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office with the Department of Defense. Randy, it's always an honor to have you join us on a show like this. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you very much, John. Thanks for the invitation, and happy to be here.
Great, and we are also very fortunate to have yet another expert on Zero Trust with us today, Ned Miller, the Vice President for Federal with CrowdStrike. Ned, welcome to the show today.
John, thank you, and appreciate the opportunity to share some observations with the audience today.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. We have so many interesting things on the agenda to talk about today. But all of our guests are working on or have some great insights about innovative ways that zero trust programs can function within government. But our guests themselves are also so impressive with their great histories and backgrounds, I thought we should first take a moment to learn about the talented people who we will be spending the next hour with. So, Sean, let's start with you on this one. You are the Trusted Internet Connection Program Manager and the Senior Cybersecurity Architect with the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which we will just call CISA from now on. Can you tell us a little bit about your background in government and technology?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, John. So I've been supporting, you mentioned TIC, the Trusted Internet Connections Program. TIC came out in about 2008 under Karen Evans when she was leading the efforts at OMB. I've been supporting TIC since it first came out back then. They've had different iterations of Trusted Internet Connection, TIC 1, TIC 2, and then in 2019, we've OMB released what we call TIC 3, or resetting a lot of the TIC initiatives. At the same time, I supported other efforts across the community back in about 2014 or 2015 when cloud really started to ramp up interest across the government. The TIC program partnered with the FedRAMP program at GSA, and we came out with what we call FedRAMP TIC overlays. Really one of the initial ways for agencies to understand how to secure cloud in these new environments. Moving forward a little past that, I'm also a co-author of NIST Special Pub 800-207. There's 4 of us that are the co-authors of the Zero Trust Architecture Special Pub. I always joke that I'm the Ringo Starr of the group. Stu, Scott, and Oliver, they're really the rock stars of that publication. Also supported right out of the Cyber Executive Order 14208, improving the nation's cybersecurity, and particularly the action items on that for writing the co-authoring the cloud security technical reference architecture. A little more recently, the Tech Modernization Fund Board. I'm one of the board members on the TMF board as the government tries to help accelerate agencies as they move to the cloud. Thank you.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, Sean. I would argue that Ringo Starr is a bona fide rock star as well. I've actually been to a few of his concerts, but I get where you're coming from. Thank you. And Kevin, you are the Director of Technical Account Management with the Office of Enterprise Technology Solutions for the General Services Administration, or the GSA. Can you tell our audience a little bit about your background and what you do right now, today, with the GSA?
Yes. I help agencies from across government meet their enterprise technology needs. I mean, my organization's role is to make it easier for government agencies to adopt the quality solutions they need to accomplish their missions and make it and facilitate industry offering their modern technologies too. And my largest focus today is on assisting agencies move to the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions, or EIS contracts. You know, virtually every federal government department and agency is transitioning their telecommunications and other enterprise networking services over to EIS, including those for cybersecurity. You know, so EIS is one of the vehicles can be leveraged for solutions in a zero trust architecture. You know, and it's also a catalyst for network modernization, and the transition is a catalyst for that modernization. So in addition to EIS, I also assist industry and agencies with the Managed Mobility Program, and really I work across the entire GSA IT portfolio, as well as other interagency efforts, such as with the Federal Mobility Group and some of the efforts around IPv6. Yep. I am my team.
Yeah, please finish. I'm sorry. I thought you were done. My fault.
Oh, no, I pretty much just wanted to recap there. I and my team, we strive to understand the agency's missions, their needs, so we can advise them on options, be it leveraging the contracts I just mentioned or something else. And to do this well, we also work quite a bit with industry, understanding the current modern and the emerging technologies. So thanks, John.
Oh, no problem, Kevin. Very impressive. So, Randy, you are the Director of the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office with the Department of Defense. So it's really great that you can be with us here today on a Zero Trust show, as we have lots of questions for you. But before we get into that, can you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about your unique background?
Sure. Hello, everybody. As John just mentioned earlier, I'm Randy Resnick, the Director of the DoD Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office. Prior to my selection in January 2022, which began this program office, which was just 8 months ago, my previous assignment was within NSA, National Security Agency, as their strategic lead for the NSA Zero Trust team. That was my last assignment. But in fact, my entire career actually was spent at NSA. I have experience in both offense and defense cyber for over 34 years. So I think I bring a nice experience to Zero Trust, understanding both sides of attack and defend to help best accelerate Zero Trust adoption within the DoD.
Excellent. Thank you, Randy. Appreciate that. And Ned, you are the Vice President for Federal with CrowdStrike and an expert in Zero Trust as well. Can you introduce yourself to our audience and maybe tell us a little bit about what you do and some of the public sector agencies that you get to work with at CrowdStrike?
Sure, John. Thank you. So I look after CrowdStrike's federal business practice and have responsibility for supporting our customers' interests within the Department of Defense, federal civilian, and the federal systems integrator worlds. And in this role, I have the privilege of working with folks to help them solve some of the more complex requirements that come out of the authoritative sources, such as NIST and DHS and our friends on the DoD side. And in particular, I've spent the last several years focused on Zero Trust in particular. And while here at CrowdStrike, we have been most focused on the White House executive order that came out with respect to zero trust, with an emphasis on endpoint detection, which is a core competence of CrowdStrike. So I typically work with customers around their foundational element of the zero trust reference frameworks, and that's around EDR.
Excellent. Thank you, Ned. Appreciate that overview. Have lots of good questions for you in just a bit. So thank you all for introducing yourselves to our audience. I think today will make for a fascinating discussion because each of our speakers are approaching zero trust from a slightly different perspective. Now, there is no single definition for zero trust, so let's level set things for our audience today so that we can get everyone on the same page, or at least as close as possible as we can with the kind of a large concept like zero trust. So, Randy, the last time you were on a show with me here at Fed Insider, you were talking about how you were tackling zero trust directly as the director of the Zero Trust Portfolio Management Office with the Department of Defense. Now, your office was created specifically for zero trust in the DoD. Can you tell us about that mission and some of the groundwork that you've already done as you work towards that goal?
Absolutely. So to begin, to give an idea of where we sit in the Department of Defense, the ZTPFMO, as we call it, organizationally sits within the DoD CIO organization in the Pentagon. So we report directly to the DoD CISO, who's Mr. McEwen, who reports directly to the DoD CIO, who is Honorable Sherman. So our Zero Trust Portfolio Office is here to provide strategic guidance, to direct alignment of efforts, and to prioritize DoD resources across the entire enterprise to accelerate zero trust adoption. So you can imagine that we have a strategy that we've been executing over the last 20 plus years. This office was put together to do something different. It's to accelerate zero trust adoption, which is the next generation adoption of cybersecurity. So what we did is we put together requirements for achieving zero trust in the department, which I'll explain later in the broadcast, with our goal of fiscal 27 or sooner to achieve that. So the overall vision of the portfolio office is to deliver and ensure that the enterprise is mission resilient, that it can function securely in both peacetime and wartime, that it accommodates what now is a hybrid workplace, and that can protect our people, devices, applications, and data from any adversary coming from anywhere.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Randy. Appreciate that. So, Kevin, I know you've done a lot of work, as you mentioned in the last section, with the Trusted Internet Connection Program, or TIC, which recently migrated over to the TIC 3.0 standard to give agencies more freedom and security with their Internet connections. I remember when that happened, we did a lot of Fed Insider shows on that subject. I was wondering if you could today explain for our audience how the TIC 3.0 works and where that fits with efforts, where that kind of overlaps with some of the core concepts of zero trust in government.
Yes, I've worked with CISA and DHS on the Trusted Internet Connection, or TIC, since almost day one of that program. And Sean, who's here there, of course, he's been involved, I think, since day one, and is TIC expert there. So the TIC initiative is to enhance the network security across the federal government. The original TIC reference architecture, where it did consolidated external connections and deployed common tools at these access points. So it was a traditional perimeter defense model. It was suited for the hub and spoke, network designs there. And, this network design, it became inefficient with the increased adoption of mobility and cloud computing, having to bring all the network traffic back to a small number of data centers and back out to the internet. So TIC 3.0, that, is a major update, and that drives the adoption of a distributed cybersecurity policy enforcement model. And it leverages the advances in security technology, and allows agencies to adopt those mobile and cloud environments in a more efficient way with performance and security. So it supports the TIC 3.0 model, supports the security, flexibility, and the visibility that needs of the agencies in this more modern environment, with the evolving threats. So TIC 3.0, it enables that move from the proverbial castle and moat security model to one centered on users, devices, applications, and protecting the data. And that all sounds very similar to zero trust. So in agencies, TIC architecture and the move to a TIC 3.0 solution can dovetail nicely with their adoption of zero trust. And in particular, TIC 3.0, that it does focus on the network aspect, though not exclusively. And furthermore, the TIC policy and guidance that shapes the architecture of every agency's enterprise network. It's a mature program, so agencies develop their networks with the TIC policy there. And so agencies who have been aggressive in adopting TIC 3.0 and moving in that direction can be well on their way to a zero trust architecture.
Excellent. No, that makes a lot of sense, Kevin. Thank you for laying that out. I knew there was a connection there, but I wasn't exactly sure how deep that was, so that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So, Sean, I know CISA is working on a draft of the cybersecurity maturity model alongside other agencies, and I also know that you've been heavily involved in that effort. Can you tell us about some of the core concepts of that new model, and where and how does zero trust fit into it?
Yeah, sure. First, I got to thank you for asking Kevin on the TIC question. Like you said, he's been there since the beginning as well, and he answered that question so much more eloquently than I could. So I was laughing here in the background when Kevin was talking. So thank you, Kevin, for.
I took some of your speaker notes.
Okay. On the zero trust maturity model, sure. So the zero trust maturity model, our CISA's, is one of many roadmaps for agencies to reference as they transition toward a zero trust architecture. We have two main goals when we wrote that draft maturity model. Number one, to assist agencies in the development of their zero trust strategies and implementation plans. They're required first under the executive order and then under the federal zero trust strategy, the OMB memo that was released in January. And second, and this was key, was we mapped ways that various CISA services can support agencies and their solutions and their architectures. So again, we co-wrote that maturity model last summer of 2021, in a very short period of time. We sometimes take, and Kevin's part of this, it take months to write architectures and use cases. This maturity model we wrote in just under 2 weeks, I think it was, which someone joked was the back of the napkin for us, to help agencies with the EO and crafting their implementation plans. And right from the zero trust strategy itself, the executive summary, it talks about, and this goes back to what Kevin was talking about, the federal government can no longer depend on conventional perimeter-based defenses to protect critical systems and data. So in that maturity model, we have 5 main pillars: identity, devices, networks, applications, and data. And then we have 3 cross-cutting capabilities that cut across each of those pillars. Those cross-cutting capabilities are visibility, automation, and governance. So when one refers to OMB's memo in January, each of those pillars, you can see what is action items for the agencies. They're mapped out, taskers, if you will, for the agencies. For example, under the identity pillar, agencies are looked at to have phishing-resistant multi-factor authentication and enforce identity at the application layer, no longer just at the network layer. For the device pillar, agencies are looked at to support and roll out stronger endpoint detection response, and CISA is supporting this through our continuous diagnostic and mitigation to help agencies enable or better facilitate the rollout of the EDR platforms. And also, CDM was tasked to support cloud-oriented assets in new ways. Then the network pillar, again, the third pillar. And there's taskers in the strategy for encrypting all DNS traffic, HTTP traffic, and for agencies to develop these architecture plans that we've been talking about. The fourth pillar, applications. There's a strong discussion, strong task for agencies to treat applications as if they are connected to the internet, and also to employ empirical testing when releasing these applications. And then the data, where I'll wrap up. For data, make use of data categorizations in new ways. And the advantages that cloud provides now, take advantage the ways that cloud services can monitor access to sensitive data. So again, I think it all wraps back to how the maturity model is helping agencies and where Zero Trust can fit in. Thank you.
Sure, excellent. Thank you, Sean. Appreciate that. And Ned, we definitely appreciate having an industry expert on the panel today. I know CrowdStrike is working hard to bring agencies over to Zero Trust. So as my first question to you, I'd like to ask you about some of the top concerns that you are hearing about from your government and public sector customers regarding Zero Trust. And also, have you already started to work with some of them to either set the groundwork or actually get Zero Trust working for some of their applications or systems?
Sure, John, great questions. So from an experience standpoint, we've been working with a number of federal civilian agencies over the past year, as Sean had mentioned, to get their EDR deployments fielded and operationalized. To date, we've got well over 1 million endpoints out across the federal civilian executive branch that are under management and being protected today. So quite a bit of experience there with that foundation for first step of engagement into kind of the Zero Trust journey as we talk about. It's not a single product, it's a reference architecture, and it's a maturity model that they're to follow. So second question, I think, John, you mentioned was, what are we seeing in terms of their concerns? At this point, as the customer matures through adoption of capabilities towards the outcomes that they're looking to achieve based on the maturity models, what we are seeing is there's still risk in the area of identity. And we'll talk more about this as we go through the broadcast again later this afternoon. But the top concerns that we're still seeing are typically identity-based attacks, and based on some artifacts and evidence and some of the reports that we've generated over the past year, we're still seeing approximately 80% of all breaches result in evidence that there were compromised identities involved with respect to what was the root cause of the problem in the first place. So identity continues to remain a challenge. And from our perspective, we've looked at it from what can we do to innovate and complement the existing identity credential access management systems that are out there and focus more on identity protection. So those are some key areas that we're starting to see concerns bubble up from our customers that we're supporting in the field.
Excellent. No, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. So the show today will dive into ways that federal agencies can implement tools and protections to support Zero Trust in an increasingly hostile environment, some of the reasons behind that, and also some of the very impressive innovations that are already occurring in this area. And as for our audience today, I wanted to invite all of you, my friends, to please submit questions for our panel. Some of you are already doing that. We appreciate seeing them streaming in. If we can't get to your question on the show today, we will round them up and answer them later on. In either case, please don't miss out on your opportunity to get a Zero Trust question in front of our amazingly talented panel of experts. Okay, Ned, I wanted to start with you on this next section because I know this is an area that you and CrowdStrike really study. You have so many sensors deployed looking at attacks really around the world. Can you talk about the kinds of threats that you're seeing today, which ones are the most dangerous, and why those specific attacks will require Zero Trust in order to give defenders the advantage that they need these days?
Sure. So again, based on our experience, we're still seeing, as I mentioned previously, about 80% of the breach attacks and actual compromises are going after compromising credentials and for very specific targeted attacks. As a result, using stolen credentials, that gives the adversary the opportunity to, at that point, leverage that privilege to go after an organization's sensitive resources. We refer to in the industry as moving laterally to get access to that sensitive agency data. We have made, as an industry, and in particular, CrowdStrike has some capabilities here, so a little plug for some innovation, very specific investments in the ability to help protect identities. So as the ICAM credentialing system issues the credentials that allows the user access to the system, we then add a layer on top of that that looks at how do we protect the integrity of the user themselves, the identity of the user. So the concept of reducing the identity attack surface, detecting any particular behavior that we see is anomalous to how the individual perhaps works, and even taking it to the point where, and I believe one of my colleagues mentioned multi-factor authentication, ensuring that based on risk profile changing, that we can enable what we would consider a multi-factor authentication initiative where users may have to be forced to log in again. So again, this is centering quite a bit around what we're considering, the identity or compromised credentials targeted attacks, at least for the past year. And there's a number of vectors that we can draw in terms of the who, the techniques, the tactics, and that's why we believe we're helping our zero trust defenders here with alternative, innovative approaches to help solve for this particular problem.
Excellent. Thank you, Nan. That was very interesting indeed. Randy, I would like to ask you about interoperability, because that is something that our other DoD guests who come on the show often talk about and say that it's critical for them because they need to make sure that different groups or even different services can work together. And because you can't get to zero trust with a single product or service, how critical is it that DoD implements a zero trust strategy in a way that does not create silos? And how much of a challenge will it be for the DoD to do that with so many independent services and branches operating more or less independently?
Yep, so that's a great question. It's a great question that everybody seems to ask a lot. And so if you just bear with me, it might this might be an answer that might be in a minute or two longer than normal. So when we began the portfolio office in January, like I said, we were faced with the challenge of, quote unquote, accelerating zero trust adoption. So that can mean many things to many people, but we all understood the intent. And so what we did is we looked around to see if there were successful examples of zero trust at an enterprise-wide level. You have to remember DoD is 4 million endpoints or more. So even if you take a tenth or a hundredth of that, we were looking for successful examples of zero trust at an enterprise-wide level that was actually implemented, that we could read, lessons learned, we could understand, pros and cons of how they did it, etc. What we found quickly was that nothing existed. All we saw were a lot of vendor claims that they had a lot of zero trust solutions, widgets, if you want to call it that, and that's all great and fine. But nobody ever put them all together to create this zero trust effect. And so we quickly started, with tongue-in-cheek, we started to panic because not only were we in charge of accelerating the adoption in zero trust, but we didn't even understand the fundamental real questions to ask. We knew we had a smart team. We knew we had to start somewhere, but nobody asked a question on where do we stop? Is there a stop point? Is there a point to which we declare success? And so we were asking all of those basic questions. So what we did is we looked across our fundamental beliefs. In DoD, unlike what CISA is doing, which is essentially the same really, is in DoD we have a 7-pillar model, and we chose to suggest or say that all of the pillars of the 7-pillar model are equally weighted, meaning they're equally important, and that we're not going to prioritize one over the other. And the reason why we did that, or have that position, is that if you're an attacker and you know your adversary, your target is focusing on, let's say, 5 of the 7, I'm going to apply my attack on the 2 that you're not really focusing on. And so, to prevent this weakest link in the chain sort of thing, philosophically we said we have to approach zero trust on an even basis across all 7 pillars. So that was kind of foundational for us. Then we knew we had to have a start point, And then we needed kind of like an endpoint. And so we started asking ourselves, where's the other end of the bookshelf? And what we decided on is to essentially stop or contain the adversary. So, why do zero trust if you're not having the effect of stopping the adversary? That's why we're going to zero trust. So we had the two bookends, and we had to fill in the middle. Now, answering this interoperability thing is really key because we had to fill in the middle that everybody could then repeat. The Army could repeat it, the Navy could repeat it, the Air Force could repeat the same process. And so we went back to the 7-pillar model, and we decided to do essentially a predecessor-successor sort of relationship, and we defined all 7 pillars based on capabilities. And to make a long story short, we came up with 45 of these capabilities, and we defined what those capabilities were and what outcomes we wanted to achieve, all the way down to containing the adversary. And so it's that, what we're now calling the implementation roadmap in the DoD, which is now out for final coordination within the DoD. Once that's fully approved, it's going to get signed out by the DoD CIO, and it's going to become effective in the department. And that lays out for the department our definition of zero trust, the unchanging definition of zero trust across all 7 pillars, and at an activity level, which is a step-by-step cybersecurity sort of statement, we're describing exactly what we want to achieve in each one of those pillars in a number of steps. And so that's a repeatable process. Once this gets signed out, we're going to make it public. And so hopefully in a month, 6 weeks, we're not talking months and months from now, this will be made available for everybody to take a look at, comment on it, and improve on it if need be, and we'll take all those comments. But that essentially is the way the department is going to roll out zero trust, is with this common definition, common roadmap. We're going to monitor progress, and that's going to enforce that interoperability because everybody is doing the methodology the same. Now, I noticed there was one question. I'll answer one of the 2 questions right now in the Q&A, and that was it's talking about one product over the other. So when we came out with this methodology, what we expressly didn't do is we are not prescribing a solution. This is not a solutions architecture. We avoided naming vendors or products. As a matter of fact, I don't care what product you use or vendor you use. As long as you meet the definition of our requirements of the activities that we lay down, you could mix and match any vendors, products, and solutions together as long as you come up with the overall mapping or the definition of zero trust. So if you can cover the landscape that we're describing is needed, then that's great. We would ask you to put it all together, and you still have to run it through your AO or your RMF process, get it approved more locally at your level, and we will just monitor that progress. It's a little more elaborate than that, but there is no policy, there is no requirement to use any product, any vendor at all in zero trust.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Randy. And thank you for answering some of our audience questions. I know there's a lot coming in, so audience members, please keep those coming. We love to see them. So, Sean, thank you for talking about the maturity framework in the last section. In this section, I would like to ask you about modernization, because that's another topic that we get to talk about with our federal guests here on these Fed Insider shows a lot. Can you explain where zero trust fits into technology modernization, and how critical will it be that zero trust be a part of really any agency modernization program?
Yeah, sure. So I think when we talk about modernization, it's really key to understand modernization efforts should be based on value, not about modernization simply because we have new technologies to adopt. What is the value that we utilize, if you will, with the modernization? So even Randy talked about this. John Kindervag created the Zero Trust philosophy 10 plus years ago. Zero Trust means inspection, interrogation, integration, like Randy just talked about. All these things lead toward modernization. Again, putting on my TMF board member hat for a second, I think we've reviewed well over 100, maybe 150 TMF proposals at this point. A large number of those proposals had like a zero trust tone to them. There's a lot of others, to be fair. There's customer experience and other tones in these some of the proposals, but certainly a significant number of the TMF proposals include modernization and have zero trust principles built into it. I think the key, though, for modernization is, aside from the technology there, is how modernization is that cultural shift. I mentioned earlier how we co-authored the Cloud Security Technical Reference Architecture. We co-authored that with FedRAMP team out of GSA and the USDS, United States Digital Services team out of OMB. The USDS team had a great great section, if you will, in that Cloud Security TRA, talking about adopting DevSecOps principles, combining development, security, and operation principles. It's more of a software philosophy that tightly integrates writing code with the testing, the security, and deploying that code. This is all new. If you talk back to like what Kevin was talking about a little ago, the old perimeter, there is no, I don't think, real connection between the old castle moat philosophy and DevSecOps. So it's again more than just technology. It's understanding these new opportunities and what it means for the teams across the environment. We have the cloud and security in different ways. Ideally, what we're trying to do here is, at least from a security perspective with modernization, is trying to understand how better to move security closer to what is being protected. You have all these general principles: least privilege, minimalization, multi-attribute analysis, as Randy was talking about before, these new signals coming in, dynamic policy enforcement. But again, all this comes back to we're trying to, like, if you had a Venn diagram, those two circles, zero trust and modernization, they probably almost overlap each other significantly, I think. So there's a natural correlation between zero trust and modernization.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. That was really interesting, tying modernization to a culture shift. Lots to think about. So, Kevin, speaking of a shift in culture and workplace, one of the most dramatic shifts in terms of the federal workforce was the recent shift to increased telework as a result of the pandemic, and the fact that many agencies are keeping much more robust telework policies in place, perhaps indefinitely. Can you talk about how that changed or shifted government cybersecurity needs, and where Zero Trust might help to step in and enhance the security of your remote workforce?
Well, John, I think you're right. Work from home is here to stay. Still not sure where the long-term steady state is going to be between remote workers and those in the office. And of course it'll vary depending upon the mission and the role. For example, DoD has some demanding use cases, as do most other agencies. So we need to consider a scenario where some of the workforce is remote, some is on site. You need to consider where the data and applications reside. Much will be in public and private clouds. Some will be on-site or corporate data centers, and need a security approach that can accommodate this and that can accommodate changes and respond to new threats. So it's been a busy few years for IT teams. Most networks were configured to connect remote users to a central location or a small number of locations, and then have the clients access agency data and resources on the internet, including cloud computing. So at first there was bolt-on capabilities, some new services, getting additional VPN licenses, maybe bandwidth for internet gateways, et cetera. Security was taken very seriously. New approaches related to remote work were fast-tracked and, in some cases allowed on an interim basis. And agencies, quickly moved to improve performance. Some agencies were already well along and others less so. And now the government looking more for the long-term changes and efficiencies. So, government agencies have had to rapidly shift from the reliance on perimeter-based security to distributed and cloud-friendly security models, and to embrace that more distributed and agile network architectures. So these trends were some of this was in place and moving even before the pandemic, but now with those shifts, it's really accelerated things. And with this, there's the increased use of the public internet, more endpoints, and a larger attack surface. So really, with its emphasis on users and devices and protecting data, the zero trust architecture is designed to support this environment. Endpoint enforced security versus relying on perimeter-based security. Flexibility beyond traditional layer 3 VPN solutions. Employing like security-defined perimeter or zero trust network access and application layer security, all of course with multi-factor authentication. So that's a part of zero trust that is needed for today's environment. The policies allowing split tunneling coupled with services such as secure web gateways. This all improves application performance and reduces the demand on an agency's network. Regarding mobile devices and applications, you have the enterprise mobility management, mobile application management, and ideally coupled with security agents such as endpoint protection platforms, unified endpoint management, data loss protection. Increasingly now that you're seeing mobile application vetting. And so these are all parts of a robust zero trust architecture and how it helps meet the needs of today's modern environment.
Excellent. Great answer. Thank you. Really appreciate laying that out for us. So thank you all for those amazing insights so far. Now, I promised we'd talk about innovation, so let's dive into some of the innovative aspects of zero trust programs and ways the government is starting to move zero trust from concept into innovative implementation. So, Sean, let's start with you on this one. Before the show, you and I were talking a little bit about ways that government was working on zero trust, and you mentioned a mandate that requires agencies to move at least one system with a moderate security rating to a public-facing posture, I believe, so that they can learn how to secure it as a step towards zero trust. Could you talk about that initiative for our audience and what you hope agencies will gain from doing that and participating in that exercise?
Sure. So yeah, this goes back to the Federal Zero Trust Strategy, OMB's memo. And one of the actions in there is for the agencies to identify one internal-facing FISMA moderate application. No, that's a mouthful. Internal-facing FISMA moderate application and make it operational, accessible over the public internet. The idea here is OMB, we want to move agencies away from supporting those legacy network VPN solutions. We recognize at the same time this is going to be a major shift for some agencies. It'll take significant effort to achieve. Well, ideally, what we want is agencies start leaning in to these new authentication and authorization opportunities. We're on a session-by-session basis, unlike there was on the VPN where it was just one bulk tunnel, if you will, and that was where at the network layer was assumed there's a lot of security and the authorization, if you will, of those sessions to be allowed. So OMB wants agencies to take an internal-facing system and move that so it's accessible to the internet. And we've met with a number of agencies as they're going about this. Some agencies are still trying to understand the definition of what we're trying to do. Other agencies are pretty aggressive in trying to move forward using this action item to help move their internal processes, their internal teams to support this new modernization effort. In the end, I think when you listen to Krista Rush's team, the federal CISO, and Eric Mill and others in OMB, one of the ideas here is this is just one system. It's more of a minimal viable product, MVP, if you will, because we want the agency to start small and understand as they move this system to be internet accessible, what are the new types of signals that are available. As agencies secure this application in new ways, it's going to mean different ways to ingest data, talking back to what Ned was talking about in terms of how we analyze all those new types of data streams coming in. And it'll be necessary in ways to build out new dynamic policies. So all this goes back to really that what Kevin started off with, that traditional castle and moat. As we move away from castle and moat, these opportunities become just simply different. And so we need to have insurance that agencies are learning about these opportunities as we migrate these type of systems to internet-facing solutions.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Sean. So, Kevin, one of the GSA's responsibilities, as you mentioned, is to help provide options for federal agencies to move towards zero trust and improve their security. But zero trust has a lot of parts. So I was wondering if you could tell us about the new Zero Trust Buyer's Guide that you've created and what it does.
Yeah, the Buyer's Guide, it's all about making it easier to procure quality, compliant products and solutions. So someone can't just go out or buy zero trust. And there's a lot of marketing material out there mentioning zero trust. I think Randy talked about different vendors coming in with the zero trust solution. So we looked in with this buyer's guide to make things easier for industry to offer, and especially for agencies to procure aspects of a zero trust architecture. So the Zero Trust Buyer's Guide, it's rooted in this Zero Trust architecture, the 800-207. And we looked at different Zero Trust security models that were also being developed, like CISAs, like DODs. And for the Buyer's Guide, we defined 8 pillars or aspects of Zero Trust, user, device, network, et cetera. And within each pillar, we define certain components, such as within the user pillar, there's an access management component. And then we've also looked at the zero trust solution space, with the industry and what are the solutions that are out there, and what contracts provide the products and solutions for each of the components. So essentially, it's a little bit of a mapping here from the various pillars to the components to the contract vehicles that provide those products or solutions. And they have security and compliance baked in to those. There may be like a cybersecurity, supply chain risk management, or CSCRM requirements in there, trade act agreement requirements, FISMA requirements. There's also we also have the Cloud Info Center and FedRAMP Marketplace that lists which are FedRAMP compliant and at which level. So it lays all this out. And of course, many contracts and solutions, they can span multiple pillars or certainly multiple components too. Mm-hmm. So, I think of an agency, as they move towards a zero trust architecture, they'll want to see where they are today, what they already have, then see where their gaps are. Then what are their options for filling those gaps? And that's where the Zero Trust Buyer's Guide really helps. There's also a handy graphic as an appendix. It's a one-page poster style overview of ZTA components. And the Buyer's Guide, it's designed as a living document, so there will be an update. That's something that's planned.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like a great tool. Thank you for talking about that and making our audience aware of it. Ned, it was really interesting hearing how Kevin and the GSA are tracking zero trust and breaking it down into components. I know that you get to work with a lot of public sector customers. Can I ask you to maybe share with us an example where agencies were already able to begin implementing zero trust and maybe doing it in a very innovative way?
Sure, absolutely. So a couple of things. One is the catalyst, I would argue, was the White House executive order that started, I believe it was back in May of last year. And there have been some subsequent follow-on directives that helped inform agencies what path to begin to take, and then funding came through CISA, et cetera. So what we observed was, and we worked pretty closely and very hard to make sure we were in alignment with who we consider the authoritative sources. So, for example, as Sean has mentioned, CISA was pretty far out in front, designing the premise of zero trust and the maturity model and their particular pillars. Mr. Resnick was doing the same thing on the DoD side. So from our perspective, our job number one, we clearly have been a leader in our particular EPP, EDR space. and we were on the leading edge of bringing the first cloud-native endpoint protection capability to market. So we were already in a position with FedRAMP certifications and going down the path for DoD certifications, et cetera. When Zero Trust became kind of the mantra of the day last year, and we looked around at the number of interoperability vendors that we needed to work with and provide interoperability for within the Zero Trust ecosystem. Again, we play a small part, an important part of the overall Zero Trust reference architecture, but we would take on a role as perhaps a policy enforcement point or a policy decision point, depending upon what the customer had already owned. So the experience that we had is several customers already had a number of the, I'll call it, components of the reference architecture already acquired. They may need to be reconfigured. There may have been some interoperability or integration efforts required to get to that outcome, and I believe the use cases that our friends on the authoritative source side here are trying to get each of the agencies to comply with. So for us, it quickly became which vendors did we have to interoperate with, and how could we help our customers begin to check the boxes or connect dots on the different elements that made up their overall Zero Trust architecture. So for us, it was pretty quick on the EDR side from a deployment standpoint, but then it was how do we help the customer then integrate with their ICAM system or integrate with their policy enforcement point, where it was more of a capability around access control to via cloud for remote workforce, et cetera. So we quickly did a number of those integrations, and I can safely say there are several, and we focused on the federal civilian space initially as we were patiently waiting on Mr. Resnick to produce the guidance for the DoD folks. I can safely say that there are a number of federal civilian agencies that are further along in their, I'll call it Zero Trust adoption phase than what you would think. There are a lot of very skilled folks out there. There's always room for improvement, but we've been pretty impressed. As I mentioned, we've got well over 1 million endpoints deployed across several agencies, and some of these other technology capabilities that provide very specific value to the customer across their zero journey or Zero Trust reference architectures are already in place. So hopefully that helps answer the question. I'd say there's more than a dozen agencies that are pretty well versed in the topic.
No, that's amazing. I actually did not know that. So also, we had a comment come in from one of our astute audience members who mentions that the GSA Buyer's Guide and all the related materials are available at gsa.gov/ZTA. So that's gsa.gov/ZTA. So everybody should check that out. Thank you all for the fascinating discussion today. This has been a really memorable show for me, and I'm so glad you're all here with us today. We're actually amazingly running out of time. The discussion just flew, but I would be remiss if I didn't try to sneak in one more question to each of our esteemed speakers. So, Randy, I want to start with you here on this last segment because you have a fascinating plan to break down the DoD efforts into measurable outcomes, which is kind of the key there, that measurable outcomes, across the entire Zero Trust spectrum. I think those kinds of measurements are often lost in most Zero Trust efforts. Can you talk about how that process works and how you are able to achieve measurable outcomes that will eventually span the entire DoD and all of its services?
Yep, happy to do so, and I think I'll catch answering question 5 at the same time. So getting back to the methodology that we came up with for Zero Trust that's repeatable, if I could just explain that a little more, I think it answers your question. So what we did is we looked at the reference architecture for Zero Trust, and that starts off with basic, intermediate, advanced. And so basically we, no pun intended, we kept advanced, but we merged basic plus intermediate, and we called it target for the purposes of Zero Trust. And so in DoD, the target level Zero Trust could be really thought of as basic plus intermediate, or really exceeding intermediate or, filling zero trust at the intermediate level. Why that level? Because we always felt and defined intermediate as that point where we would either stop or contain the adversary. So in DoD, if we're stopping or containing the adversary, that's pretty darn good, and that would be the target level for zero trust, and then we had to define that. So that's where, if you remember, I said there were 45 capabilities for zero trust. But what I didn't mention is underneath those capabilities, you have a number of activities. Like any one single capability might have 4 steps to do to complete that capability. So you could think of those 4 steps as 4 activities. And so under the 45 capabilities, we came up with 151 activities. Of the 151 activities, that defines everything through advanced. But through target, it turns out that that number is 91. So at Billington it was 90, it really is 91. So in order to do zero trust in the Department of Defense to the target level, which would stop or contain an adversary, you have to get to 91 activities that are measurable. That not only can you count them, but you could look at the evidence of them, and you could equate them to a 800-53 control. So each one of those activities would have an associated control. And that's where we're going in the DoD, is we're measuring controls, and we're measuring the activities that get you to target.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Randy. That's really interesting. I wish you the best of luck. It sounds like you've got things well in hand.
Thank you. You'll hear more about it as it rolls out, but we're very excited here. We would love to get feedback once it gets released.
Excellent. Excellent. So, Ned, thank you so much for talking about the more innovative aspects of zero trust with our audience today. For my final question to you, I wanted to ask you about an area that I think is pretty innovative, which is starting to get linked with zero trust, and that is threat hunting. Could you talk about how a critical tool like threat hunting, a critical activity like threat hunting, can be enhanced once zero trust is in place?
Sure, great question, John. So as we've thought about zero trust, and as we start to get to more of the, as Randy mentioned, the advanced use cases or capabilities, you start to ask the question, how do we ensure zero trust is working? So if you fast forward through the zero trust maturity model, one of the elements in becoming more proactive is the concept of threat hunting at the enterprise level, not necessarily just as an after incident scenario. So typically we refer to threat hunting in the context of incident response, where we're seeing the trend line and interest from customers that are accelerating their adoption of zero trust. They're getting to the point where they're now incorporating the ability to do advanced threat hunting as part of their overall zero trust capability statement, right? So it allows them to be more proactive, to search for situations that may occur before they actually happen.
Wow, that's amazing, Ned. Thank you so much. So, Sean, we covered a lot of ground today on zero trust. I know we tried to break it down into bite-sized chunks for our audience, but it's still a lot to take in. Do you have any parting advice for how agencies can get a good start on that long road to zero trust?
Yeah, sure. Like you said, there's a lot to understand with zero trust. One of the key things is not to get overwhelmed by this. This is not meant for, zero trust to boil the oceans with zero trust. It's really more, and Randy talked about this with when doctors come out of DoD, it's more a crawl, walk, run effort. Across the federal government, there are a number of ways for agencies to understand where they are in their zero trust model. First, going back to the OMB memo, each agency has a zero trust implementation lead. So I suggest if interested, reach out to those agency leads, understand what the agency's plans are. Again, each agency was to submit a zero trust implementation plan, so each agency has some idea of what they are looking to do towards modernization with zero trust. There's also efforts going on at the federal CIO council level, CISO council level. There is a federal zero trust steering group for the agencies to help, where the leaders from the agencies are meeting once a month. This is led by Sylvia Burns at FDIC, and these agencies, we meet and discuss the challenges and opportunities that agencies are seeing. There's also a different efforts coming, of course, out of NIST. GSA, Kevin's team, has a lot of efforts coming out. From CISA side, we have cyberstat workshops about once a month. They've been going through each of the pillars, doing deep dives and discussing various aspects of OMB strategy. I think the last few meetings we've had over 600 attendees. This is open to agency, federal government employees and their contractors. So if you want to participate in those meetings, you can send an email to our address, tic@cisa@dhs.gov, and we'll send it over to the right team. But again, there's a number of ways to help agencies move forward as they begin on the zero trust philosophy. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. And Kevin, that means that you get the last word on the panel today. My final question for you is, why do you think that zero trust, once it finally gets fully implemented, will be the best way to protect agencies and modern networks? And is this something that will be a definite pillar of cybersecurity in government well into the future?
All right. Short answer, yes. But long answer is that there may be a time when it's fully implemented. For example, achieving the vision outlined in the OMB memo from earlier this year, moving the U.S. government towards zero trust cybersecurity principles. But for an agency, that doesn't mean that you're done. I mean, zero trust, it's an ongoing journey. And I view zero trust as a unifying architecture. We mentioned TIC before. That concept, it predated zero trust, but it's evolved to complement it. Same for continuous monitoring and CDM. So the terms may change, but the principles in the zero trust architecture are here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. And so why do I say this? I don't see the security threats abating or getting any easier. They're always getting more sophisticated. The attack surface is expanding, and we're still at the forefront of the Internet of Things, with 5G still relatively early in its reach and adoption. So you look at the technology trends, 5G, IoT, edge computing, cloud computing, increased reliance on the internet for communications, even emerging concepts like, the metaverse and Web3. So, zero trust architecture is very applicable to providing security in this environment. It will evolve. Some of the terminology may change, and the underlying technologies certainly will evolve with more automation, artificial intelligence, and quantum technology. That's really going to be a part of the cybersecurity conversation in more so in the future. But the zero trust architecture, it is the architecture for the foreseeable future. And so with that, I just want to say thanks so much for having me on today's panel.
Oh, no problem, Kevin. An awesome answer. Thank you so much for wrapping up the show for us. And thank you all for talking with me about this fascinating topic of zero trust and some of the advanced concepts and innovations taking place that can help push it even further. I learned a lot today, and I'm sure our audience did as well. Thank you to Sean, Kevin, Randy, and Ned for joining us today to talk about this critically important topic. So let me turn things over to Fed Insider's Claudia Hosky for a few final thoughts for our very attentive audience today.
Thanks, John. And for our audience, thank you for your participation. Training certificates will be emailed after the webinar ends. And remember to log back in the next day or two to download a copy of today's captioning transcript. We have many webinars in the works, so be sure to visit fedinsider.com to see what's coming up and to register for multiple events at the same time. And while you're there, you can check out our podcast, Feds at the Edge. And with that, this is Fed Insider signing off.